everyone. Hi. What's up? Welcome back to That Dan Band Show. It feels like it's been a while. We've been doing these monthly. We switched to a monthly format in the new year, and doing a little bit more content on social media and doing a little bit more newsworthy, blippy, fun stuff, high view count type stuff. And it's been fun creating content in a different way other than doing long form podcasts. But we got to stay true to what we started with, which is doing the long form thing and keeping that going and being committed to that. So it's always fun to kind of check in with everyone every month with what's going on right now. It's February 21st. It's a Tuesday. And in terms of where I'm at my season, we just had our first public outing with George Mason's Drumline last Saturday, a couple days ago. And that's the part of the year that we are all in. The videos are starting to leak out onto YouTube. The opinions are starting to be formed in the public eye and in kind of the broader spectrum of people seeing what everyone's doing. And we start to get a feel for what the year might possibly look like just with everyone's approach to it, and just kind of where every organization is sort of at. Because when you see these groups come out, you can tell the ones that organizationally have their stuff together. I'm seeing teams come out costumed, propped, and developed, and then you see a team in a variety of different stages, and that does speak to decision-making choices where people are, how far they are, and things like that. So it's always I'd say between mid-February and really the end of the season, it's like we are in fifth gear, revved up. It's just a million miles an hour, and that's definitely where I'm at. And it's even tough to squeeze in podcasts because after this, I'm doing a meeting later, and and that's the life that we all live. Doing the independent world thing, or ever, just working with the marching arts, we know there's hours on hours, and there's really no borders around what we do. But that being said, I wanted to talk to a guest today, someone that I was lucky to hang with a couple weeks ago, do some judging, my only judging gig for the year, actually. Up in the Rochester area. So got to actually hang with a really great panel of judges, many of which are WGI judges, Rich Hammond, Bobby Jones, as well as Matt Hahn was up there, and Travis Peterman, because of course I would never do a judging gig without Travis there. That wouldn't make any sense. So that would be absolutely, yeah. Everybody knows to book us together. So it was great, and it was almost like a educational experience for me, and it always is judging, but it's also educational to be in critique with someone that I am going to be seeing from my competitive vantage point when we go out with Mason. Possibly seeing Bobby. For example, we had him the last two rounds last year, so I was just kind of listening to what he was saying and seeing the kind of conversations that we were all having in the kind of visual breakout, and that was very it was a checkpoint for me, and it was like, okay, these are the guys that are going to be seeing you, and really you're going to put your product out there and have it be seen by people that aren't involved with the group. And that's a very different part of the season, is when, what you've been seeing and you've just been like, getting desensitized to your own program, and you put it out there and all of a sudden you're seeing it through new eyes. So I'm super excited to talk to today's guest, who has an array of experiences, many of which are similar to mine, and geographically similar too. Today's guest has been involved in all aspects of percussion, as a performer, as an educator, as an arranger since 1980. He's considered one of the top marching percussion minds in upstate New York. This person's drum corps instructional career first began in 93 with the Syracuse Brigadiers, and then continued with the Rochester Crusaders from 94 to 96. He went on to serve in a variety of design and consultation roles for the Empire Statesman Drum and Bugle Corps from 97 to 2012, quite the tenure with them. Our guest has worked with European drum corps as well, including the Kids Grove Scouts since 2010, and previously the Drum Corps United Kingdom, the 2015 Drum Corps Europe champions. Currently, he holds the title of percussion arranger for the New York Skyliners. So this person is an adjudicator for band, indoor drumline, and color guard in competitive circuits all throughout the U.S. And most recently, he was appointed the judging coordinator and education director for the New York State Percussion Circuit, and continues to serve as a music effect judge for Winter Guard International. Everyone help me welcome Teddy Mascari. Teddy, I just said a lot. What's up? How we doing? How's your night going?
What is up? Thank you so much for having me. I'm fired up to do this with you, man. Dude, it's an exciting time of year, as you said. We're in indoor season. You guys are in the thick of it from putting your product out there, and we're in the thick of it just in terms of judging, getting out there. I've been to Ohio a couple times already. I've been to Indiana, going to Texas to do the Katy Regional soon. So everybody's in the thick of it, trying to really get into the season. This is Christmas for me for a really long period of time because it's my favorite time of the year.
It must be really fun, and it also must be super high stakes feeling, and I'm sure you all take it very serious. And are you like tuned into what I'm talking about with like the YouTube rollout, the unofficial leakage of media stuff? Like, as a judge, is that something you like, are you on YouTube, like letting the algorithm feed you the stuff coming out? Are you purposely staying away? Is there like an approach that y'all are supposed to like take to that?
I don't know if there's absolutely an approach that, the guys, the admin guys for WGI don't give us an approach that we should be taking. I will tell you, being an effect music judge, which is it's a caption where you want reaction. I purposely don't watch stuff.
Okay.
I don't watch stuff because I don't want to, because shows are going to evolve. I'm going to Texas in the first weekend of March. Then I'm at the Atlanta Regional. Things are going to change. Like I've sat in your shoes. Like I've worked with, independent ensembles, scholastic ensembles. Our shows change all the time. You guys are constantly trying to produce your program, kind of hone in things in your show, kind of massage certain things and, bring out the artistic quality, produce, like I said. So I don't really get into it because what I'm going to see on that day is what I'm going to see on that day. And that's what I want to react to.
That's very wise, and probably allows your objectivity to come into play on that day of, where you're not, preconceiving and sort of like having an expectation, especially because what we do is so audio focused, and even your caption is primarily through the lens of audio, and then the relationship to obviously the visual layer as well. But like what you perceive through a video can be very different than what you experience live. One thing that I wanted to talk about with you is just kind of the way that people react to the feedback they get from you, because you're seeing them brand new and you're probably like this, you can like pinpoint all these things. And I think for me, over the years of designing more and being in tons of meetings with judges, when you're starting out, every single piece of feedback or every suggestion, you see the people, or you can remember, like for myself, like wanting to integrate every single piece of feedback. And I think when you go through the process a little bit more, you start to sort of filter through. Is there a way that people can sort of understand that better, who are maybe newer to critique, or a way to parse what judges are trying to say and the feedback they're giving them? Because I think sometimes it can be overwhelming when you listen to a tape or you listen to a trusted judge and they're giving you all these ideas and you're like, well, I have this much time and this much money. Can I actually do these things? And then it's like kind of a spiral.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Dan. I think of it when I think through that process. Like I've done clinics on actually how that works, and I come from that. I come at it from not only your shoes, we're running a group, or or producing a group and putting an ensemble on the floor, and and from a judge perspective. So like talking through that process, there's a lot that goes into that. Preparing for critique on your end, you guys, you listen to commentary, you may, there are things that you probably want to ask questions about as you get into critique, but processing through that, I think one of the things that I always try to convey to staffs, and I actually did like a little clinic with one of our New York groups just before I got on here, is that judges are going to give you feedback. That's what their job is to give you feedback.
Right.
However, I go by like I have a rule of twos. Like there might be a section in a program where judge might give you feedback. Maybe this doesn't make sense. Maybe, transitionally there's something wrong. Like something's just not working,
right,
from a music standpoint, visual standpoint, how they're coordinated together. But I go through it, when I talk about it, I think about it in twos. Like, all right, so I talked to Teddy, and Teddy said, well, this, this section kind of didn't make sense. There was nothing about the concept, the music and visual didn't kind of line up for me. But there may be, from an ensemble standpoint, I might be thinking, I put my director hat on when I was running an ensemble, and I'm like, I didn't get it. It's early in the season. I haven't had a chance to clean that yet. Haven't had a chance to really crystallize what the intent is of that phrase. And
Right.
then I kind of go through it like, and then if I have an opportunity to do that, you get it out on the floor and you get the same comment again from a judge, then at that point, I want to look at the phrase. I want to look at
Mm.
that moment in time and how I work through that moment in time and take a look at it and say, okay, this isn't coming across the way it's intended. This is what the judge is talking about. I keep very specific notes when I'm on the teaching side. I keep very good notes. I keep like an electronic binder because I hate paper. I'm not walking around with, my Trapper Keeper or whatever without my notes in it. It's all virtual, but you know what I mean? It's like I keep notes, and so I know to compare and say, okay, this is the second time I got the same comment. I thought I had an opportunity to crystallize it. Now I need to take some action.
That definitely makes sense. It's like, kind of the same information you would give a student where if, you could see someone make a mistake once and that is in a vacuum, or you could see someone with a tendency. And once you identify tendency, it's like worth exploring. So that's the same thing with the design, where if reality of the judging, one time they kind of go like, this part, and you're like, well, it's not, my vision's not complete or whatever, term, and you stick with it. And then that comment doesn't come back. Yeah. Right. Versus you hear the same thing time after time. And it's like, okay, this is maybe more of a tendency of the design that I need to kind of get to, because we just had a situation, and it's actually a moment that our team has been talking about. Do we want to end it like this or like this? Visual effect judge on Saturday, love how that ends. Music effect judge doesn't love how it ends. It's like, cool. You know what I mean? Like that's
Of course.
yeah.
Of
And
course.
it's like, do you pick which one you side with? Do you go with your gut instinct with the original thing you were thinking about? But I think to one of your earlier points about it being early, it's really important people know where they are at in the season, like, and what should be happening and what shouldn't, right? So like as a judge, when you are at, let's say, regional 1 for WGI, and let's think, I guess I'd love to hear how this would work for you, obviously in the independent world circuit, for my own personal insight, but also at the scholastic level as well. How are you maybe painting things from a tone standpoint, from a language standpoint earlier, versus when we're getting down to March and it's like, this isn't going to go much further. There's that window is closing. Are you approaching those drastically different, knowing where each group is along kind of the narrative of a season?
I definitely, and this is probably, I'm sure I'm not the only judge that approached it this way, because there's amazing people we have in this activity that judge. But I definitely, the landscape of the season, I think about the season horizontally, and just in terms of my approach and my feedback and my commentary with the groups, because, one of the things that they talk about, by, whether, depending on the paradigm, a open world, talk about like teacher, counselor, critic. I probably am a little bit more critic. I'm probably a little bit more consistent on the independent world side, because you guys are world-class designers, you're world-class teachers. And I want to make sure that I'm there for you guys in a different way than I am for the open and the A's, because the amount of time that goes into it and just the pure experience that you guys have in putting a program together. I want to make sure you're getting I always, all the judges are like this, but I want to make sure I'm giving my open and honest feedback, but I'm being a critic. But, even if you're talking about for movies, there's critics for movies, there's critics for, for chefs, there's critics for everything, but you decide what feedback you want to take, because you guys are the one that have the vision. You've successfully done this activity for a long period of time, whether it's on a football field or in an arena, and you guys have to filter that information because you guys are the ones that have the vision. Where the opens and the A's, I kind of want to steer them almost like, I really feel like, especially with the A's and opens, I feel like I get to be their teacher for 5.5 minutes, and I get to teach all of those students every time I get an opportunity. So I'm on staff when I'm doing my commentary for those groups. And
Right.
I feel that way with the world groups too, but I'm a little bit more on the critic side when I'm doing that, where it's going to evolve. It evolves for those A's and opens, but I really am on the teacher side for a lot of the season for me. So that's just kind of my approach.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think one thing I've learned doing the world class thing is, there's an expectation that you can take it. And it's like, yo, it can be rough. I think, it's people bring themselves to their tapes at the world class group is what I will say. And I think some people choose to communicate kind of like, like I'm kind of, this is how I am and whatever, versus like have an understanding of we are putting in so much that we have a high expectation of what a world-class judge brings to it, whether it be in preparation, whether it be in how one communicates. And sometimes being at the world level, it almost, for some judges, it's like, I don't really need to, dig in. I kind of you need to like serve this up for me and I need to like get it. It needs to be accessible to me. And, maybe not causing me to lean in as much depending on where the group is at, or even if the group's excellence is at a certain level. Because I do think this might be distinctly in the world classes. There's this interesting thing, right? There's the boxes, right? There's like, we have box A and box B, and it's the composition and the execution. And we all know, and I think we all get why you can't read composition of a design without the filter of the execution. You're accessing the design itself through the vehicle of the performers, their training, their confidence, the communication that they bring to it, right? So I think at the world class level, at least, because that is what I can speak on the most, is like excellence kind of gets you into a certain bracket. You know what I mean? If I look down world, there's kind of the, installments of where the groups are, and maybe you'll catch a design in the 7 through 10 that actually was a little bit pushing more than someone 1 through 6, but the achievements there, right? Because I hear a lot. I had a talk with Skojo and he was like, I'm just judging the kids. I don't even think about the book. Are you parsing excellence and the production, the adults versus the members? Like, I think this is a contentious, like, it's very nuanced, like dork stuff that we get. And I hope that people that are listening understand what I'm saying. When you're sitting there, are you trying to assess the design, even if the group is folding, or you kind of like, I kind of see what you're trying to do, but it's dirty, so I can't see it? Like, what is your mindset around that type of paradox?
So let's get into the tea here, Dan, right? Let's get into the tea, because I have my process probably not the same as everybody else's, but
sure.
The one thing that people would probably tell you if you ask them about me as a judge is that 100%, whether I'm at the first group of the day or the 30th group of the day, is I'm invested. I'm invested in the program because I take it really seriously. Right. I have a process. I'm on a plane. Guess what I'm doing? I'm still looking at sheets. I'm reviewing sheets. I'm reviewing notes. I'm also listening to my own commentary because it's important. It's important because, you guys are doing such amazing things. We need to keep up. The judges need to keep up with being able to adjudicate those amazing things that you're doing. And if we don't, then you're just collecting a check. That's just how I look at it. And that's not for me. That I wouldn't do it if I was doing it like that, because that's not fair. Because at the end of the day, I'm there for the students, whether it's at the world class level or whatever. Like, I love you and all, but I love your kids more. And and that's just kind of how I roll when it comes to that. So it's as far as the clarity in the program and the excellence side of the program, my season kind of shifts. Early on, I'm really focused on construction. I'm really focused on design. I'm not as focused on the clarity, unless I completely can't read it, Dan. If I can't read it at all, that's a different conversation. And those are with different groups. But early on in the season, I want to give you guys as much feedback as I can based on the design and the programming and the pacing of the program, your vertical structures, your horizontal structures. I want to give as much feedback on those things because truth be told, this is real secret. I'm going to lean in. We want you to be good. We want you to be good. So we need to be doing, and it's how I focus. I want to give everything I can on the construction side to make sure things make sense so that, that you guys can be wonderful when it comes April, because I want to be like sitting with my feet up, eating bonbons, watching the world groups just freaking kill it, all night on Saturday night, and then just enjoying myself. And if one comment that I made, if I made one comment to you and Travis during while I'm adjudicating George Mason or in a critique or whatever, and it was helpful for you, it's success for me. It really is. I don't need to. I'm just working hard, and I know 9 times out of 10 it's not that way, because I know a lot of the independent world groups, they have their vision. You guys are all really successful. I might see something in a certain way that you don't agree with. That's okay too. It really is for me. Like, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. You guys aren't going to lose sleep over it. You have your storyboard, and you're trying to finish that storyboard, right? And so that's just how I approach it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And every judge, and this is the nature of the sheets, which I think is a positive, is every judge is meant to have a different entry point, and every judge should leave a different impression in the way that they interpret the language on the sheets is for them to interpret, and the way they even weigh the bullet points on the sheet is up for them to interpret depending on the program itself. And I think that's is a highly functional aspect of the WGI sheets and the way that y'all judge. So there's no question there. I want to ask you, from an intellectual standpoint, at least for you, does a show need to make sense to you? Do you need to understand the story for it to be musically effective? Because I think when I also look across design, capital D, I guess, in the indoor idiom specifically, that's the one that I'm, staked out in. I don't know if I feel that there's a consistent message in the activity of how clear an idea has to be for it to work. I think a prime example is Broken City. No one knows what their show's about. I certainly don't. I don't know what the words in the singing is. No one really does. But the level of student they have and the excellence and conviction they bring to what they do, along with the compositional transparency, it makes them really different and special, and they do well, right? But I don't know what the show's about. And I'm personally, but for the record, everyone knows this, I don't think the show needs to be a story or be low-hanging fruit like that. But we do get tapes, being George Mason, being where we are in our story, as an ensemble of, well, I don't know what this is, and that's all that I can talk about. I don't know what that one word is. What is the whole program about? Not giving credit to the layering and the maneuvering and all the compositional things and all the millions of other things there. Like, that's what we end up getting some of the time. So that's a very blunt question for me to ask, but like, does it need to make sense? Why do I see some groups with more opaque ideas doing well and then others don't? It's hard for me to like make sense of that at times.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. For me, it doesn't need to make sense. That's not for my interpretation. It's not my vision as far as how I approach it.
Yeah.
There's nothing on the sheet for me that says this show needs to make sense. Especially when we talk about the world class, that paradigm is very different. It doesn't need to make sense.
Right.
Does hopefully Ken meeting Barbie in a Scholastic A show need to make sense? It's helpful. Because they're trying to figure out, did I tie my shoes? Do I have the right harness? And do I, all of those things. But when you get to independent world, scholastic world, it doesn't need to make sense for me. I appreciate, that's not an entity on the sheet for me. It doesn't need to make sense. I appreciate things. One of the things that I appreciate more about groups is their identity. Because like George Mason has an identity. Like, you guys could wear any uniform you wanted. You and Travis could hide out in the hallway, and I would know when George Mason is performing, because you have a distinct identity with how you put your programs together, and the way you do body, the way you construct music and do visual at the same time. I could tell. It wouldn't matter. You guys could wear potato sacks and you two could stand in the hallway, but I would know by everything else that you're doing that it's George Mason. It's kind of the same thing with Broken City, to be honest. Like,
Right.
I would know it's Broken City because they have a very distinct identity.
Right.
Just my 2 cents. It's how I feel about that aspect of the activity.
Yeah, I guess, I get stuck sometimes because I know as well as anyone, like the students in the top, 5 or 6 groups are heavy hitting, multi-year DCI vet, multi-year WGI vets. And there's like, the pool of students, like, we're lucky we have so much talent. There's so much talent spread across. But it pools in directions, and this is just how it works. Groups have one. They're storied. They have, a pull in a way that groups that are coming up do not, right? So yeah. It's always interesting because, like, last year is a perfect example. Like, we had a very, very esoteric idea. Some of the judges didn't know what kintsugi was. I thought it was really, really obvious and low hanging. Turns out it wasn't. But I think kintsugi is as accessible and culturally relevant and obvious as Seed or I forget what their show was last year. They're all kind of that one word, trilogy style, slow rollout, installation at a time. And it's like, I watch their show. I don't know what's going on, but it's constructed amazingly. I love the music. I'm pulled in by it. And they do well. Is the only difference that they're just drumming better than us? Is it that the construction pulls you in that much more? Like, because it is hard. And let's not talk about Mason for a second, because we're doing great and it's all great. A group trying to get into the top 15, a group trying to make finals on the cusp. The story being told is very ambiguous. You're like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do this, where it's like conceptual and intellectual? Or am I supposed to do like this, which is like straight story and everything in between? Or are even people thinking at that level? I don't know. Maybe I'm like totally in the ivory tower with that one. But I think I would imagine, I am lucky that I caught a wave. I think if you didn't catch a wave, you'd be struggling to figure out, how do I design so that I can fit in this higher tier?
Right. No, it's a great question. I think that, sometimes it becomes, you're talking about, let me address one of the things that you asked, that group Sure. that's trying to get in. They're trying to get into finals, and independent world finals is, that's elite. I don't care where you are in independent world, your finals, you're elite.
Yeah.
And for me, it doesn't matter the placement. That's a show that I will sign up. If I'm not judging, I'm still watching. I'm not sitting in the hotel on Saturday night.
Yeah, you have to.
Saturday night. Like, I'm in there watching because I want to be entertained, and I can be entertained a whole host of different ways. I feel like those groups that are trying to get in are typically the groups that, for all intents and purposes, have a couple of 15 or 16-year-old snare drummers, have a couple of just kids that are, not as mature as the 19 and 20-year-olds on average, maybe a little bit older. I'm not totally sure about how that works, but I'm sure you probably don't have any 16-year-olds in your snare line at Mason.
We don't even take anyone under 18 at Mason.
So there you go. Like, so it's interesting, and people don't always value this, but from a maturity level, there's a big difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. It sounds like, oh, it's 2 years. It's not 2 years. That's gigantic.
In puberty years, that's like 20 years.
Right? I'm still going through puberty, so I'm not really sure how that works. But I think that's such a big difference. And I think that's where some of those groups that are struggling to get in, and groups that I judge, that they, maybe they stand still in a part of their show and they can drum okay, but then, just their ability to move, like 16-year-olds just don't move that way, the way older kids do. They don't know where the core of their body is. They're not comfortable that, they're just working through that stuff. With, you get to 18 and above, Those kids know the difference in what their bodies can do. And I think sometimes you can catch that youth and performance. So you don't get from a macro perspective when you're looking at a program. I can look at programs like that trying to get in and go, that kid's 16.
Spot on, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just my 2 cents, Dan, on that. But that really is how I feel about those groups trying to get in. I don't, sometimes it just comes down to, you talk about the variety that, for Broken City, for example, the variety and how they bring you in and how you're just like hanging on every moment of the show. And they kind of just like, I feel like it's almost like the puppet master, just kind of how they drag you through the show. And I think that it works for them 100% because, I'm going to high school rehearsals and during marching band season, even in New York, going to high school band rehearsals and kids are wearing Broken City t-shirts.
Right.
So it just is what it is. And people kind of get into, that style. And sometimes I think kids, if I'm talking about kids, they get into it just because initially what Broken City was doing was just flat out different.
Right.
So it's like a kid is like, oh, that's different. I'm going to migrate there. I kind of dig that. It's different than what a Pulse is doing or what a Rhythm X is doing and, and things like that. But, I think what you guys do even at George Mason is different. But it's not the different like Broken City, but it's different. It's you and Travis and it's your, it's how, it's you putting your kind of signature on that program. And doing your thing because it's so great. I'm so jealous of you guys that you get to kind of signature that program and kind of do the stuff that you really love to do. And that's why, probably some people think it's kind of cliche, but it really is. In my intro, I always say it's an honor and privilege to judge your program, but it really is. Those aren't just words for me. It truly is meaningful to me. So.
For sure. No, that's dope. And, I think that should be the tone that's brought to it. I don't think it always is. I'm not going to get hung up on that because I also recognize the politics and I recognize, a group that's been in finals for 20 years is perceived differently than the group that's been it for 5. When I'm younger and I feel like, oh, my group's like, we've been in independent world finals the last 5 years, the last 7 years, to someone who's been around the block for decades, they're like, oh, Dan and Travis, these are like these new guys, So like our perception of where we are at, I'm like, dude, well, I'm like 32. Like I'm old now to the students, but to them, they're like, oh, here's these young guns trying to break in. And it,
right.
Honestly, we are extremely lucky. Like something Tim Fairbanks talks about a lot that I think is spot on is it's very much the outliers thing where you have to be in the right place at the right time, make the right choices, and then you like catch the wave. I think with our team, we caught a wave between 2014 and 15 with like the cadets thing. And we branded really hard and just made some decisions. And then, Andrew Montero is very much a part of that. He's our front ensemble and sound designer, and he's like our musical visionary in a lot of ways. And just is like a, bottomless peanut bag of ideas, like too many ideas, but like, it's good. It's good to have someone like that. But we, like, it's hard to pinpoint because it's like, we have this identity and we didn't set out to do it, right? It was like, we're like literally hang on by a thread. We're like designing, like directors are getting fired left and right from CWP. We brought Bobby in March to restage drill because we fired our drill designer and our program coordinator. Like this is like scrappy shit. This isn't like my vision is to have an identity in independent world. Like, nah, it wasn't that. So what I see a lot of the times now with the groups on the cusp, or even to be very frank with you, the bottom 5 is just pure emulation. I'm going to be a Pulse emulator. I'm going to be a Broken City emulator. And we can't do that. Literally, when we design, we're like, all right, we need to be more like Pulse in this way with their orchestration, or more like Broken City with their nuance or whatever. And we see like we're fans too, right? So we like pick up those things and we add that to how we do what we do. But what comes out is just not like that at all. So like we're not worried about that. But then I watch a lot of groups and I'm like, this is like a diet Pulse. This is diet Broken City. And I just don't love that. Right. Like for me, I'm like, can you do something new? But if you don't know how, you don't know how. So that's that tough spot to be in when you're in that 20th through, beginning part of finals is like, you're trying to get in by emulating, but then by emulating, you can't bust in any further because you just kind of, you're stealing the tricks of those who came before you. So it's tough. Like, it's a tough spot. I'm insanely honored that you would consider us to have an identity that you could point out in any way. That's dope. But I couldn't tell you how that happened. Do you know what I mean? It happened organically. And if I'm going to tell every designer, just let it happen, like, is that really going to be like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, how
it's not going to work that way. It's
Right.
not going to work that way.
Exactly.
No, I appreciate that. But like, you run into that gamut, right? It's like, okay, so this group that's 22nd and they're trying to get into finals and they're trying to emulate Pulse. Well, they're not going to play with the same quality of sound that Pulse plays.
Right.
Because sometimes that's their identity. For me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be cheesy or anything like that. Like, sometimes that's just their straight identity. Like, you're going to hear every note.
Yeah.
Every note in the ensemble. And that's kind of their, and that can be kind of their identity. I'm sure, John and Ian work really hard to have an identity, and they have an whole entourage and they have their website and they do their whole thing. But that for me sometimes is their identity. It's just an amazing quality of sound that they play with.
For sure.
So, you look up and down, just people just have different identities for me. And I work with that. Like, that like with Matrix World, Rob's going to do something kind of like something, he's going to try to do something that people haven't seen before. Last year with the lights and what he did with lights and the whole effect on the visual side and how strong that was. And, you guys should do your thing. And, all these groups have so much difference. And even in their, like, in the sound, it might not be the quality of sound, but it might be the actual sound. Because I feel like United has that and an identity and, like, in their sound palette that they typically use for their program. So it's like a lot of these people work to have their own identity in some way, shape, or form. To your point, it probably wasn't even on purpose. It probably just happened organically for a lot of those groups, but it just happens. And then when people try to emulate, if you're trying to be one of those groups, if you're trying to be George Mason and you're not in finals and you don't play as well as their kids do, and you don't perform as well as their kids do, and you have some immaturity in your performance, then it just makes it even harder because you're literally being compared to them if you're trying to be them. And it's just not going to work, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And it's a tough spot for, you're designing or you've been handed the keys, because the reality is a lot of the time it's like, I'm ready to move into this role. And then you're into it and you kind of realize, like, this is not a, like, really glamorous situation to be in. About 98% of the time, the pressure, and everyone's going to be like first world problems, but it is what it is. But, like, to get into the part of the season where we're being compared across the country, where unfortunately there's national ranking happening from coast to coast, different judges, different circuits, whatever. Yeah, I roll for sure. But, like, we all see it. We all understand, like, a narrative is going to get started. We come out in this box, and that's the unfortunate part of sort of this network that we have, where, like, we're all so plugged in. Everything is super just connected in terms of, how much access we have to numbers, to videos. Like, and I told Mason too, like, every weekend, I'm like, there will be videos immediately. And we got done with the show. There was like 4 videos out, and there's things I would take back, but I'm also like, I'm pretty stoked, like, to be able to watch the audience watch it. There's actually a video I highly recommend that you watch. I'd love your reaction, or, I guess if you don't want to, you probably can't watch us, but there is a video maybe later on after you're done with your job. It's really cool. It's from the backside line. So we're actually facing the audience. And so it's a different perspective. And for me, where I'm at in my course of doing this, this is year 10 with Travis, and then this is our 9th year in world between the two groups. I'm now tuned more into the audience, because I'm like, is this going to hit with who I really care about, which is the people that are there to see a performance? Because I feel like the activity is we are in a weird identity moment. I came from, and seeing, the years you came up, resonate with you more than me, right? Like we came from nitty gritty, rudimental, nuts and bolts. We went full theatrical, face paint, Dartmouth, Pulse, maxed out Broadway. And now we're kind of like, are we this? Are we that? Can we keep this up? How much money can we put into it? The production value ceiling that's been established. It's really crazy. And I would love to talk about Matrix in that regard too. Rob is a great friend of mine, and Bobby had very polarizing numbers last year with them, and they're a perfect example of what I'm talking about. 13th in hands, first place in effect visual, 8th overall. That is the conversation. That is the nucleus of where the activity is at. Crazy production value. So much money and so many resources put into the production value, but 13th in execution of what the students are doing. That puts me
I
in
agree
a very,
with all of that, by the way.
Yeah, that's fine.
They were 13th in hands all day, in my opinion. In my humble opinion.
Yeah, that's cool. Like, yeah, I only have seen the videos, and when I saw the lights that Matrix put together, it was like,
off the hook.
Crazy. And you guys don't need to worry too much about like how that happens. But for me, the question becomes, is that a standard we're setting that is going to be sustainable? Where do we go from there? And I'll connect that to one final thing before I pass it to you. We were in the car driving down to Mason, and Montero, as usual, is in Chat GPT, throwing prompts into the chat. And I was like, oh, whatever, this is dumb. And I was like, okay, ask Chat GPT what the future of indoor is. And it's like growing use of TVs and electronics and filtering and lights and this and that. And I was like, Chat GPT's wrong. I was like, that's not the future of it. That's a bubble. And we're in the bubble, but I think that it establishes a standard of straight monetary spend that is not sustainable. And it does send messages to the schools like the one I judged in Rochester, putting effort into TVs, spending 75% of critique talking about the TVs and not talking about their kids. So with that, I want to pass that to you, see what your thoughts are. I know I'm being apocalyptic.
No, so first of all, I'm just going to keep it real. I don't think any high school scholastic A group should have TVs on the floor. I think you should spend the money on your staff and teach your kids. Because I don't think they benefit. Like if you want your kid to end up like going to George Mason and auditioning and doing anything like that in Scholastic A, you're not giving them the opportunity, because you probably should have paid money to, and if you're in New York, you probably should have paid money to bring Teddy Mascari to teach your kids instead of buying TVs. Just keep it real. I also don't think it's sustainable. So what's the next thing, Dan? Like really, like we didn't have TVs, and and I thought the activity was fine, and we bring the TVs in. I'll be honest with you, at all levels, depending on where they are on the floor and how much time you put into what's on the TVs, they're distracting to me.
100%.
They're distracting. Like if they're just highlighting like emotional stuff, and you can put some stuff on there that makes sense, and where are they in the focal view? You know what I mean? Like I've had the scholastic groups come into critique, and they're like, well, you missed a bunch of stuff on the TVs. And I'm like, well, you have them on the front sideline, but your moment is in the center of the floor. And we're in a high school gym in New York, which is very different than a high school gym in Texas, where where you judge is like what, 13, 14 rows of bleachers? It's not very high. So I find myself doing this. I can't connect the thoughts. Do you want me to watch the TVs, or do you want me to watch your kids? Guess what? I'm going to watch your kids.
Yeah.
And if I miss that stuff, then I miss that stuff. But then maybe you should have had them in a focal view where maybe you should have had them in the back. Maybe you should have thought about, like, oh, I'm going to get into this cool TV thing. Well, don't. Just teach your kids. Just teach your kids. That's Teddy's opinion. That's not a WGI thing. That's totally Teddy. TT, totally Teddy, but yeah.
Did you just coin that right there? Did you just coin that?
I think I did.
Ooh.
I'm sending Travis a t-shirt that says TT on it next week.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I really, we go back and forth. This is like one of those things because we've gone heavy with props and our prop budget and our uniform budget. And, we've never done the high tech thing. I don't see it working. I see a lot of finals runs with TVs out, to be honest with you. So we're not even interested in it, just like fundamentally from a functional standpoint. I wouldn't know how to integrate it. I could see, when I look at the use of lights and screens and concerts, when you go see an electronic concert, if you go see, house music and the way that lights can project and change the mood, that to me is interesting. That's something that Matrix was able to kind of start in that process. But just for them to do that was like, to me, was like step one in it being done right. That is so hard to do. Like, we can barely just get down the road. It's so hard to just have an independent roll group. It's so hard to just feel the drum line. And they took the first real step, I would say, with the lights thing. And it was cool. We have integrated some use of lights and LEDs and lighting cues in our show. But we're doing costuming in-house. We're doing all of our prop building in-house because that's just what we have to do, because we allocate money into a staff budget, because the cost of buses has doubled with inflation. The cost of hotels has gone up. So it's like, I get spun out on like, do we all need to spend this much on props to just be considered? And if not, if you don't have the horses that Broken City has, how can you get in there? Right. It's like, and honestly, like, construction would be the first thing. That is my answer. I'll answer for you. Focus on construction and designing a well-constructed show that's paced moment to moment, and the emotional variety is there, and it tells a story, whether it be narrative, literal, figurative, metaphorical, doesn't matter, whatever. 90% of people aren't doing that. So this isn't for them. But, we see the change of the tides with the Blue Coats level of production, with the OSHA, with the ladders and the helmets, with the, like, just adding more and more and more. Right. So I just like, I don't want that to be the message that's out there. And I unfortunately, like, I want to like say, like, I sound kind of goofy with all this, but literally I think I judged 14 groups, and one of the 14 had massive TVs in front of their front ensemble. And I was like, you should cut them. Like, me as a judge, cut the TVs. Yeah. Cut the TVs. And they were like, oh, well, it's like, okay, let's spend critique talking about your TV programming with the, whatever. I'm not gonna get into specifics, but yeah.
Right. I mean, like, my thing with that is like, so you're going to spend your 3 minutes, whatever your critique time is, at our show that you came up for in New York. That's our extended critique show. So you had 10 minutes, but regardless of how long it is, you're not talking about the kids. You're not talking about how you're going to make students better. You're talking about a TV, that I can watch Friends on. Like, I don't mean to be cynical, but for those scholastic groups, I just don't think it's a good decision, because to your point, like, you come into critique and you're spending all your time talking about that. Like, and we've seen things like that fail. We've seen, I've seen Matrix fail and the TV's not work. So, it's like, you put so much time and effort into so many different things. It's like, you guys work really, really hard to make sure that your electronics work for your show, right? If your electronics don't work for your show, holy Hannah, it's going to be an issue, right?
Yeah.
Now you're going to add another layer on top of that. So if my electronics don't work and my TVs don't work, then we just went back to 1999 indoor percussion, right? Like,
yes,
seriously. Like, I know there's more bodies in 1999 and stuff like that, but like, you take away all those things and you went so far back, because then you become so reliant on those things for your program. And when they fail, they fail. And if you made them the pinnacle, the centerpiece, whatever you want to call it for these moments, and then you don't have it. And then who suffers? Those kids that you should have not put them in the show, and you should have taught them.
Yeah.
So I'm always gonna make sure that any feedback that I give or any of my judging is always going to be directed towards the kids. You and I have talked before. We talked during the drum corps season. You know, you wrote for the Hurricanes, and I judged the show, and we had a great critique. You and I, and you know how I gear my commentary. I gear my commentary so it's commentary that if you wanted to play commentary for your group, you can play it. And sometimes it's just a different voice. So I just don't think that I kind of talked myself a little bit into a circle, but my point is that, like, especially for the younger groups and even the older groups, like, if you have so much reliance on that and it doesn't work, the kids are the ones that suffer. I don't care how much money you spend. If half your TVs don't work and your electronics don't work, and it's Saturday in April and you're in the Dayton Arena, your kids are the ones that suffer for that.
Yeah, my sense, honestly, like, this is kind of like negative, but it is what it is. Like, my sense is like, we are a art form or a performance output that, out of all the things in our lives, is in person, is live, like a play, like stand-up comedy. There's the risk aspect. It's not programmed. Anything could happen. And that's what makes watching groups, excel, succeed, execute. You're like, wow. Like, it's almost like seeing a phenomenon, right? When Pulse comes out and they somehow get this good in this time, through all the things that they've set up through Chino Hills, through all the relationships, all the years, it's like, man, that's special. But you know what's not special? Hitting a button and watching something on a screen. Like, everyone, like, this we're inundated with that. So I find it ironic. You see the groups do the screen shows, but they have screens. It's warning you not to watch the screens, but then that screens are in the show. And I'm like, like, I think if I was going to do a show about social media or screens, there wouldn't be any. It would be like a beautiful green pasture and a flowing streams, and there would be cattle out grazing, and I'd be frolicking with like a whatever, like, so there's like some weird
upside down.
Yeah, like, I don't see, like, you're trying to show me the danger of screens through screens. Like, I just think it's an unhealthy direction. Me personally, I know some people are probably gonna have an opinion on that, but I just want to witness excellent programming and drumming together. Obviously, that's the bullseye, is that you have designed an amazing show. You're able to teach and train, and generally what we know is the process of designing a show very much equals or doesn't equal the excellence you see on the floor. So there is, to go back to what we were talking about earlier about like excellence and effect, is like, you can see that a show's been constructed great because the kids clearly have gotten reps and clearly are well put together. If you're makeshift in that process, it's going to be tough to get consistent. That's just what it is. There's consistency trickles all the way down, or it doesn't, right? So last thing I want to ask you about here as we get towards kind of the end is about kind of like local judging. So something really interesting that we experience, at least, in the circuit that we compete in Northern Virginia, is we don't see a lot of WGI judges. We see a lot of local judges. And the local judges like to, I think we usually get one or two in all the panels who like decide, because we're a rural group, they're going to like impose their viewpoint onto our show instead of making a assessment that would be, absorbent and is interacting with what we're bringing and all the elements. They kind of go like, oh, this is like, I can tell, you know what I mean? I judge. I can tell, already see how you were nodding, because you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're like trying to prove themselves through our tape.
Right.
What's the deal? Like, can we help them? Like, what's going on here?
So one of the things you talked about a little bit earlier is I'm a judge administrator for New York. So I kind of coordinate the judges. I also do education for the circuit. And one of the things that's really important for me, for the local judges, even the guys that were around for a while before I took this role, that are local judges, is they were required on their own dime to go through the WGI certified classes. Mm-hmm. Because I think, we talk about, even, as teachers, as professors or whatever, continuing education is really important. I'm constantly like, I'll just sit in my office and run commentary over groups, in the off season, and just listen to my
That's
commentary.
smart.
I still fumble with my words sometimes. I
Sure.
absolutely still do. And then sometimes I listened to it this weekend, like I'll pause because I know I fumbled. I'll wait for that phrase to end, because one of the things I try not to do is talk too much. But I also want to make, because some people, like, they don't get the moment, because especially with you guys, right? With world-class groups, the moments are longer. There's more evolution. There's longer phrases. The shows are just flat out longer. When people talk a lot, I don't think they get the holistic moment that was planned.
Right.
I think I try to not talk as much. So if I thought, like, if I fumble with my words, I'll pause for a little bit and I'll let the moment resolve, and then I'll try to recap, because I'll catch myself. I'm at least in tuned enough to know what's happening, to know if I fumble my thought, I want to come back to it, because someone's going to ask me about it. Teddy, you remember when you lost your mind in that phrase and no one could understand what you were saying?
Right.
Like, I get it, but I also judge a lot. I'm not practice judging a lot. I judge a lot, but I also practice judge a lot. I really do. I think it's important.
So I think that's a great tip, because like I'm kind of just complaining, but I think an actual an item you can walk away with is, if you are judging a world-class group, sit back and try to pay attention and be very intentional with the feedback. We got a tape last week, or I rather on Saturday, and it was like, dude, like the things you're saying are very out there. We got a comment. It was like, oh, we had a bass break, because in our show, we were getting audience response at the beginning of ideas, because that's how the show is structured. At the beginning of ideas, we haven't, it wasn't like, it was like idea number one. And then it was like, reaction, whatever. And one of the judges was like, how are the basses going to re-enter over the audience applause? Like, that's going to be a problem. We're like, well, they just did. So what are you talking about? Like, we re-entered into space.
Right. What's the problem?
What? Yeah, look, it's happening here. Right. Misunderstanding the essence of the show. Right. Why did you guys do this? Like, I didn't get that. It's like, well, that's fundamental to the show. The audience got it. Every other judge got it, but you were busy making these esoteric reaches, and it felt like I have to like instill them with some like random thing that they would never have thought of. Oh, the audience is applauding, so like, are you trying to say that getting audience response is a problem? Like, it wasn't, and this is an effect tape, for the record. This is a music effect tape, and it was like, dude, can we zoom out and go, I am judging effect, right? The audience is laughing or responding or like literally just enjoying it. And then you're sitting there being analytical. I'm like, okay, there's something going on where you're not being like authentic to yourself as a judge. You're like trying to do something. You had a plan going in, right? So I just don't know. We get people like that at the local level, and I want to help, as you do very much, is like, if we raise the local level, we raise everyone, right?
Right. I think it's important to, for the people who are judge administrators or people who do what I do, like on the education side with the local judges, is invest in them. And probably the reason why I'm really invested in those people is because, we talked about money and putting money on the floor and all that stuff, how that's not sustainable.
Right.
I can't in New York bring in Rich Hammond every weekend. I can't bring in JJ Pipitone every weekend. I can't bring in Bobby Jones every weekend. It's just not a sustainable model. We have 23 groups in our entire circuit, and we're not connected to a color guard circuit. It's just the percussion circuit as its own entity. So I listen to commentary all the time. You can't even sit in the gym and shadow for me unless you've done WGI certified, let alone start to make commentary. And then I take those things seriously. I'm in the airport on Sunday mornings and I'm listening to commentary for my judges, and trying to offer feedback. And I've had to do it twice since I've taken this role, but I've had to tell judges that I can't give them good reasons why, but I've actually twice, and I just did it this past weekend, had to do something where I told the judge all the reasons why I couldn't use him anymore, but then tell him he had one more assignment and I took it away from him because he's affecting the student. And at the end of the day, it's a bold move. I was judging with another person last weekend who caught what was going on in Ohio. And he asked me about it, really good friend, who is a WGI adjudicator as well. And he's like, Teddy, I wish more people would do that. He goes,
Right.
He goes, you fired your judge. And I'm like, I don't like to look at it like that, but in essence, that is what happened. But they weren't invested. I listened to the commentary and I'm like, I'm not just going to get, it was a local judge. I'm like, you're not just going to come here and get a paycheck. I'm like, I have to use local judges just because it's the way the activity is and we're in New York. It's not like SCPA that can pay for WGI judges every single weekend. But I take it seriously. And at the end of the day, I'm always going to err on the side of what the kids' experience is. And that this particular individual took that away from the students. So I did what I did.
Our students listen, they have access to all the tapes. Yeah, no, I think that's valid. And our students do listen to all the tapes. We give them access to the tapes. So it's not hypothetical. I think the tape should be, I think a simple standard is that the tape is playable to the student would be constructive. I think that is simple and pure and to the point is like, don't put a tone out that you're not invested or you're not putting effort in. That's not too much to ask because judging is a responsibility because it does inform the direction of where we go. It is one of the most ultimate responsibilities. We work in conjunction with the judges as designers to move things forward and to make decisions that are healthy for the community in general. It's not us against you guys, but that means we need to be professional and bring respect to all the groups that we interact with, whether it be as a judge or as a designer to a judge, because if you are in the independent world class, you are educating the judges just as much as they're educating you on what you're doing, right? You guys are learning from us.
100%. I would say that you guys are educating us even more at times. And that I put time into trying to educate myself and you talked about last year's George Mason show and people not understanding maybe what it was, but the show titles are in Comp Suite and everyone has the access to the internet
and the description.
Right. So it's like, if you weren't really sure, like
Google
that's part of studying for your test.
So anyway, different rabbit hole. That'll be part 2 of the episode, but I want to thank you here for stopping by on a Tuesday and just chilling. And we'll get back at this because we could hash through this for forever. But I just want to thank you for jumping on and spending some time with us today and being a great friend, a great judge, and caring about what you do. I think it's super dope and just appreciate it, man.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. I truly, truly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thanks for stopping by here. We will catch you next time. Remember to like, subscribe, do all the things, and we will see you next time. Peace.